Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Career Evangelist Podcast. On today's show, we are joined by a global trust strategist, TEDx speaker, and Harvard Business Review contributor, Laura Kriska, who is also a former employee at Honda Motors Company, headquartered in Tokyo. She has spent over 30 years helping leaders eliminate the us versus them mindset. And this mindset, we believe, silently kills career and performance.
Mhm.
Now, if you want to build influence, credibility, and trust faster, this episode is for you because our guest today, Laura, is going to be teaching us, telling us how to build trust. And with that, we welcome Laura. Hi, Laura. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Bola. Thank you so much for having me today.
Awesome. It's good to have you join us today. And I know I just said it that you started your career with Honda Motors, I think at the age of 22. Uh, that was your first job, I believe. Is that so?
私はアメリカから初めての女性、日本に本社におりました。Yeah, I was the first American woman to work in the Tokyo headquarters, which I was just saying in Japanese.
Okay. So yeah, I also brushed up on my Japanese and I was going to say hello to you in Japanese, which I found out to be konnichiwa. Did I say that right?
Perfect.
Uh,
Actually, that's perfect pronunciation. And I love that you knew speak Japanese and you refreshed your memory of that one word. I think that type of activity, that action, is
mhm.
something that I consider a we builder
Yeah.
action.
Okay.
Just it's not becoming fluent in a different language, it's just learning one word.
Exactly. So I know just two words, and that was the first one. Maybe I'll tell you the second one during this conversation. So now let's go into it, Laura. How does us versus them thinking, how does that quietly stall someone's career growth?
It's such an important question, Bola. And I think that it's the kind of question uh, that people don't ask themselves very often because these us versus them dynamics are built in to the workplace.
Mhm.
For example, sales versus marketing, engineering versus manufacturing, blue collar versus white collar, front office versus back office. These are different departmental groups and they exist, but they can damage a person's career when the divide becomes so great that the individuals inside the same organization behave as competitors toward one another. So let me give you an example. Is that okay?
Perfect. Yeah, let's go to it.
So I was working with a client a while back, and they literally said to me that the other department, they were in one department and they were talking about the other department inside the same company.
Mhm.
That other department will not share information with us
Oh,
about clients.
yeah.
Um, and I mean, I hear examples of this all the time where there's some tension. Sometimes there's just open resentment between these different departments. The way it usually shows up is in small comments.
Mhm.
If I'm in a company, I'll listen to the way people talk about others. A typical example, I live here in New York. There are many companies headquartered in New York, and
Yeah.
they'll be satellite offices. For example, in Houston. You're
Mhm.
in Houston. This
Yes.
actually just happened last week. I was talking to somebody in the headquarter of their company, and they were talking about the Toronto office. And they were just every time they brought up the Toronto office, there was just rolling their eyes. Oh, the Toronto people, they won't do this, they won't do that. And this was a leader speaking to me, an outsider.
Yeah.
Now it wasn't open hostility. It was this kind of low grade um, frustration, and it was characterizing everyone in the Toronto office as uncooperative, hard to deal with, whatever it was. So those to me are indications of an us versus them dynamic that has gotten overly divided. Obviously, different every company has different departments. These departments have different mandates. People should be doing different types of work that are aligned with their expertise. But when these divides get so intense or deep that there is that type of casual comment or even open resentment about people in the same organization, that's where it's damaging both the company, the departments, and the individual's career.
So, Laura, I think you are spot on. I personally have experienced this as well
Oh,
in
really?
here, this us versus them. And I'll tell you this, I tell people that we are one team, right? As long as we belong to the same company, same organization, we are playing in the same team. So we should see ourselves as one team. Now, I think we can both agree that this is a problem. Now, how do we solve this problem? What are some ways, some ideas that people can start building trust so that interdepartmental people will see
Mhm.
themselves as one belonging to the same company? How do we do that?
I'd say there are two strategies. One is at the leadership strategy.
Mhm.
Leaders themselves need to be aware of how they talk and frame conversations about other groups. And in my book, The Business of We, I give examples of us versus them language and what I call we building language. So leaders need to be we builders. And a
Yeah.
we builder is a person who takes action that limits us versus them gaps. So, like when we started out and you used a phrase in a language that I know, that's an action that limits the gap between different languages. So, with departments, us versus them leadership language would sound something like this. Um, that the Houston office never meets their deadlines. Again, I can't believe they haven't met this month's deadline, right? So very complainy, very attacking, characterizing the whole group as the same. And
Mhm.
a we builder doesn't ignore the problem, right? Leaders have to understand these problems exist, but a we builder might say, you know, I noticed the Houston office has missed 3 deadlines in a row. And by missing deadlines, it's impacting our ability to meet our customer needs on time. So this is a big problem for us. Does
Right.
anybody have some solutions, or does anybody have insights, or how can we try to solve this? Does anybody understand? So it's just even just the framing of how leaders speak is
Yeah.
one solution. And then another solution has to do with the relationships people have within the organization. What
Yeah.
I noticed with Japanese companies versus US companies has helped me think about this in a completely different way. And Bola, I don't know how familiar you are with the way Japanese companies tend to hire and employ people,
Mhm.
but there's a general pattern of hiring people straight out of high school or college.
Mhm.
And then in mainstream companies, they stay their their entire careers and they're moved around a lot.
Mhm.
And so rather than having an expertise, for example, in accounting or engineering, people literally might be moved between accounting and engineering. And so that pattern of transferring people and a lot of movement fosters more understanding and better relationships throughout the organization. Now, US companies tend not to behave that way, and that's fine. I'm not saying we should follow the
Yeah.
Japanese system, but I'm suggesting that there are things we could learn from that highly mobile way of employing people. So when I hear, for example, New York people talking about
Yes.
Houston, sorry to be picking on Houston, I would think one strategy would be for me as an individual in New York, especially as a leader, what are my relationships like with the people in Houston? Do I know everyone by name? Are there any people there with whom I've shared a meal? Have we even met, with our hybrid workplaces? Many people these days literally have never met each other in person, yet they're expected to achieve this high level performance, just like before the pandemic. And it's just not realistic when you don't have those relationships. So back to the solution is to reflect on yourself, think about the us versus them dynamic, and look at yourself. Have you done the work to build up your relationships with key people in that group that you are kind of thinking of as them?
Okay. Okay, no, that's good. I like the way you said it. It's all about framing. You are not telling people not to talk about problems or if they need to meet certain deadlines, but the way they frame it is what matters. And now that will take me to my next question about leadership because you've mentioned
Mhm.
leadership in a number of times here.
Mhm.
What behaviors do you think leaders need to start modeling so that they will help the entire organization to develop that mindset of hard,
Mhm.
not against being against the other departments?
Mm. I mean, it would be the way they frame things, the relationships they have, the two things I just mentioned. And then one additional thing is how are resources utilized? And resources can refer to a lot of things: money, space, time, physical resources. And one thing I've noticed in a lot of companies, not every company, there's sometimes a hierarchy where certain groups are considered more important. Maybe
Yeah,
they are the revenue generating groups.
right.
And obviously, generating revenue is very important. But the generate revenue generating groups do not act independently. They
Yeah.
are fortified by non-revenue generating groups. And I think there's a notion that if you're not generating revenue directly, you're not as important. And this kind of thinking is wrong. It causes us versus them dynamics. And it has the attitude of when there are resources. Let's use a non-monetary resource as an example. Let's say a space in the building, a conference room, for example. If there is an inherent default hierarchy that everybody kind of has agreed to implicitly or not, that there's this idea that, oh, that group should have the conference room or they're entitled or they should, that kind of thinking can really undermine the notion of we and a more collaborative approach. And obviously, this also applies to money. And this is one that's really difficult to challenge leaders on because we should be paid for our work, obviously. But how much do you pay?
Yeah.
And is it right to pay one group X amount and another group a lesser amount? And
Yeah.
obviously, there are formulas and a lot of thought that needs to go into this. But my overall experience is that when those resources, in terms of payment, income, salaries, when there's a big difference and a kind of implicit hierarchy that one group is more important than another, that can quickly undermine a collaborative, we building approach to the organization.
Okay, so you mentioned hybrid the other time, and we
Hmm.
know that the post-COVID world has ushered in this hybrid working environment.
Hmm.
Now, how what do you tell people that are hybrid or maybe mostly remote in
Mm.
terms of how they can still make sure that they are well incorporated with the team so that
Mhm.
this us versus them atmosphere is not segregating them from the entire group?
Great, timely question for 2026 because there's so many people working remote. And one of the first things is that it's not only the job of people working remotely to
Mhm.
foster these connections. I think that's often the default, right? We think, oh, that person's working remotely, so it's that person's job. But everyone has some responsibility to be fostering this environment where, whether you're remote, whether you're hybrid, whether you're in person every day, where you're making connections with people throughout the organization. Because again, if everyone's not working toward the same goal, the whole organization is not operating at optimal productivity. So, some very practical tips um, would include thinking about, again, those relationships. What I notice is that people who work in the same space are better connected, right? It's kind of human nature. You see someone, you have small talk, you share lunches and things like that. You're literally in the same space. It's much easier to be developing some familiarity and some kind of professional relationship. So people who work hybrid need to make the most of their in-person time, whether that's, the once or twice a week, or what I'm noticing companies doing is bringing people together once a quarter, once a month, where people literally get on planes, fly to one location. But this is the problem. I see companies make that commitment. They bring people together, they're spending time, they're spending money, and then they don't properly leverage this golden opportunity where everybody's together. For example, they'll have a meeting that they could have had online. They waste their time, right? Or they'll foster support like, oh, let's have lunch or let's have dinner, where people end up sitting next to those they already know anyway. What's the point? So those times when they actually get people together need to be more strategic. So if you're getting people together and you're having a meal, it may sound kind of elementary school like, but I would mix people up on purpose. I'd say, hey, let's pick numbers and sit next to somebody new, for example. That would be an easy we building action.
Okay.
But otherwise, I think it's important to use that time strategically. I've been using, I facilitate an activity. It's a 90-minute activity called the Team Machine, and it quickly gets people connected in a really strategic way because it's using behavioral science and getting people to connect in a way that usually might take weeks or months. It takes a couple hours.
Okay. So we've been talking about we building mentality. I want to hear from you. How do you work with organizations to establish this we building approach? What do you do? What's the process like?
The process usually is starts with leaders.
Okay.
And so I would often facilitate the team machine activity that I just described with the leadership team. And it not only brings those leaders together, but it helps identify where the big silos are in the organization. Leaders usually already know, but they're too busy to talk about it or they don't want to talk about it.
Right.
And doing a simulation on your feet, interacting with other people, helps to reveal in a somewhat lighthearted way where the barriers are in that particular group. And then that leadership team talks about it and comes up with some solutions. The fascinating thing to me has been that it does not take that much time.
Mm.
if you have a little bit of strategic time in person, much of the follow-up is done virtually. Because here's the thing, Bola, the leaders themselves know what actions they should take.
Mhm. Yeah.
And with a little bit of encouragement and understanding that these little actions will have a big impact on the whole organization when they see that so clearly through the experience of the team machine, um, they're motivated and they take these actions and there's an immediate payoff because they build trust, their relationships get stronger, they start solving problems when they're manageable and small rather than waiting till there's a crisis. So that's been one of the ways that I work with leadership teams.
Okay. So to someone out there listening to us now, if they want to start building this trust and having this we building mentality, are
Mhm.
there some habits that can help
Mm.
accelerate this for them?
So I often say that to be a we builder, you need two things. And
Okay.
these two things are free and accessible to anyone.
Okay, that's good.
Do you want to know what these are?
Absolutely.
Number one is the willingness or the genuine interest to bridge a gap, whatever that gap is, right? If, like you were saying, you had experienced a gap in your own corporate experience. So if I'm working with a group or I'm talking to somebody out there, I'd say, what's the gap? What's the us versus them gap that's preventing full optimal productivity for you personally? So you have to, be really actually interested in genuinely closing that gap. That's the first thing. That
Mhm,
doesn't cost anything. That just requires a moment of reflection. And
mhm,
then the second thing is sometimes hard for people, but it's the willingness to look at yourself
mhm.
and ask, what have I done? What actions have I taken? Have I just wished that these two groups got along? Did I just wish I had a better relationship? Did I wish someone invited me to lunch, so that I could get to know them? So rather than just thinking about and wishing, what actions have you taken to try to build up this relationship? And usually something that can be done. And a lot of times it doesn't cost anything. It requires learning people's names, spending time in conversation with them, asking simple questions about their work, trying to understand what their goals are, and saying, is there anything I can do to be supportive? I mean, these are simple, no cost actions that anyone can take, but often we don't. We don't have time. Um, we're not sure about doing or saying the wrong thing, so we hesitate. I mean, there are many reasons why people don't take those actions, and that's part of my job when I work with a company. I will go in and I'll challenge people gently, and 99% of the time, people will step up and take the actions that they've already been thinking about, but they just, for whatever reason, didn't do before.
Okay, so as we are coming to the end of the show here, I always love to hear success stories. I want to hear from you, maybe any example where you help transform an organization or a team from
Mhm.
the them to now the horse or what we call the we building mentality.
Mhm.
So,
So I'd love to tell you about a success story I had recently. Actually, this was in Houston, a
oh,
company that I worked with, a
okay.
leadership team of
Hmm.
a large organization, and the members of the leadership team, some of them were in Houston, some were in Florida, and then one other city, I can't remember.
Hmm.
And um, some of the leaders knew each other well, some had been recently hired. So there were varying levels of trust
Yeah.
within that leadership team. But that leader, it was a HR, human relations leadership team. So they were responsible to support the many hundreds, maybe thousands of employees in that company, benefits, payroll, all the different things that HR does. And uh, during the in-person engagement, when I was working with them, I like to use live polling questions that are anonymous.
Okay.
I happen to like Mentimeter as a tool. It's an online tool that's free. And the reason I use it, and I think anybody listening can use Mentimeter, when you ask anonymous questions, your employees and colleagues will tell you things that they would never say to your face.
That's
So
true.
I asked this group anonymously, I think there were 9 people in the group at the time, how many of you have reached out to another leader who was sitting around that table to build up your trust and relationship? Not for a work purpose, but, and I think 2 out of the 9 said yes, they had, within the past quarter, which
Mhm.
was shockingly low, shockingly low. So we did the initiative with the team machine. We helped identify some of the problems that existed. And then a month later, we met virtually online, and I asked again the same question. And then it was 4 out of 9.
Wow.
And then another month later, again, very short periods of time.
All right.
By the end, I think 3 months later, 8 out of the 9
It's
had
good.
done this. 8 out of 9. And it didn't take that much effort in terms of time spent working on these issues. It just required, using behavioral science where you check in, you ask people to make commitments, and just follow up, being accountable. They did the work and their organization got stronger because of it.
Oh, that's so good. So now we have come to the rapid fire question section. So,
Okay.
Laura, trust or competence, which comes first for you?
Trust.
Trust. What's the biggest trust killer at work?
Not being truthful, not doing what you say you're going to do.
Okay. One phrase professionals should stop saying. What would it be?
Should stop saying,
Yeah,
it's not my job.
it's not my job. So one phrase that build instant credibility was that.
How can I help you be successful?
Oh, I love that. Remote work, advantage or disadvantage?
Advantage.
Advantage. Okay. Best way to repair broken trust.
Take responsibility and apologize.
What's the most
Genuinely, genuinely apologize.
Genuinely apologize. What's the most underrated leadership skill?
Apologizing and taking responsibility.
Finally, Laura, is there any message that you want to tell our listeners here that I've not asked you so far?
I am on a mission to inspire a we building revolution where individuals take action to close any us versus them gap that disrupts productivity, unity, and peacefulness in the world. But I cannot do this alone. I need your help, Bola. I need your listeners' help so that the We Building Revolution will create a more welcoming, productive, and safe place for all of us.
And I am joining that mission, and that's why we are here on the Career Evangelist to continue to spread this message because I truly believe that this is something very important in organizations. So we'll continue to spread the message. It's one team, no more us versus them. That's the message. We building, that's the mentality. Thank you
Building.
for coming on the show, Laura. I enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed talking with you.
All right. Have a good one.
Thanks.